She was thrown into a blizzard, until a lone cowboy whispered, "My twins need you." The stagecoach door swung open and she tumbled into snow so deep it swallowed her knees. Behind her, the driver didn't even look back, just cracked his whip and left her standing in a storm that erased the world. She pressed her carpet bag against her chest and realized she'd never felt cold like this. The kind that found your bones before your skin stopped shivering. The advertisement had promised room and board in exchange for light housekeeping at a cattle station near the mountains. It hadn't mentioned the station was 20 miles from the nearest settlement, or that the last winter killed 3 families who tried homesteading too far west. She'd answered because her sister's husband made it clear there wasn't space for both women under one roof, and pride wouldn't let her beg. So she'd packed her mother's cameo, 2 dresses, and the last of her dignity, then bought a ticket to a place she couldn't even pronounce correctly. The wind howled through pines so tall they disappeared into gray nothing. Her boots, thin-soled and citified, sank with each step as she stumbled forward, searching for anything that looked like shelter. The cold made her lungs ache. Snow clung to her eyelashes and turned her shawl into frozen lace. She'd been walking maybe 10 minutes when her foot caught on a buried root, and she went down hard, face first into a drift that felt like being smothered by a wet blanket made of ice. She didn't hear the horse, didn't hear anything except her own ragged breathing and the hammering of her heart. But suddenly there were hands under her arms lifting her like she weighed nothing and a voice cutting through the wind. "Can you stand?" She blinked up at him. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a sheepskin coat crusted white with snow. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark eyes scanning her face with an intensity that felt clinical, like he was cataloging injuries. "I asked if you can stand." "Yes." Her voice came out small. She hated how small it sounded. He didn't let go until her boots found solid ground beneath the snow. His horse, a massive roan gelding, stood patient as a statue behind him. "You the woman from the advertisement?" She nodded, teeth chattering too hard for words. "Station's 2 miles northwest. You wouldn't have made it." He said it matter of fact, without judgment, but the truth of it settled in her stomach like a stone. He turned toward his horse, then stopped. "You ride?" "Not well." "Doesn't matter." He swung up into the saddle with the easy grace of someone who'd been doing it since childhood, then reached down. "Give me your hand." She hesitated. Everything about this felt wrong, strange man, empty wilderness, storm that turned the afternoon dark as twilight. But the cold was wrapping tighter around her lungs, and she could already feel the numbness creeping up from her toes. She reached up. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion, settling her sideways across the saddle. "Hold on." She gripped the back of his coat and felt the horse surge forward. The world became a blur of white and gray. The gelding's hooves muffled by snow, the rider's back a wall against the wind. She pressed her face against his shoulder without thinking, just seeking any warmth she could find, and felt rather than heard the low rumble of his voice. Almost there. The station appeared like a mirage. A squat log building with smoke rising from a stone chimney. A barn hunched beside it, corrals buried under snowdrifts. He dismounted first, then lifted her down with the same impersonal efficiency he'd shown before. Her legs nearly buckled. Inside, he grabbed her carpet bag from where it had somehow stayed clutched in her frozen fingers, then guided her toward the door with a hand at her elbow. The heat hit her like a wall. A wood stove roared in the corner, filling the single large room with blessed warmth. She stood dripping onto rough floorboards, taking in the sparse furnishings. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall, shelves holding tin plates and cups. Everything neat, everything spare. Then she heard the crying. 2 wooden cradles sat near the stove, and from both came the thin, desperate wails of infants who'd been crying long enough to sound hoarse. The man moved past her without a word, shrugging out of his wet coat and hanging it on a peg. He went to the first cradle and lifted out a tiny bundle. "This one's the boy," he said, supporting the baby's head with practiced care. "Girl's on the left." She stared at him, at the baby, at the second cradle where another small face scrunched red with misery. "The advertisement," she started. "Light housekeeping," he finished. "Feeding 2 infants counts as light, I figure. They're 3 months old. Lost their mother when they came into the world." His voice stayed level, but something flickered across his face, there and gone like heat lightning. "I can manage the cattle, manage the land, can't manage them and everything else. Not alone." The baby in his arms kept crying, little fists waving. She watched him try to soothe it, rocking with an awkwardness that spoke of desperation rather than skill. The second baby's cries grew more insistent. She'd never held an infant in her life, never wanted to, had planned to stay unmarried, maybe teach school back east, live a quiet life that didn't include nursing or nappies or any of the things women were supposed to naturally know. But something in the rawness of those cries, in the way this hard-faced man looked utterly lost holding his own child, made her set down her carpet bag and cross to the second cradle. The baby was so small, impossibly small. She picked her up with trembling hands, the girl he'd said, and the infant's crying softened to confused hiccups. Dark eyes, unfocused and wet, blinked up at her. "They're hungry," the man said. "Been trying to get them to take goat's milk from rags. Doesn't work right. They need—" He trailed off. "A wet nurse." She said what he wouldn't. "You tried the settlement?" "Every woman there's either got her own to feed or won't come this far out. Can't blame them." He looked down at the boy in his arms. "Advertisement was my last idea before—" He didn't finish that sentence either. She understood what he wasn't saying. Understood that these babies were days, maybe hours, from starving despite his best efforts. Understood that he'd plucked her from the snow not out of kindness but out of desperate hope that any woman might know what he didn't. "I don't know how to care for infants," she admitted. "Neither did I 3 months ago." He met her eyes. "We'll figure it." The storm lasted 3 days. She learned to warm goat's milk to the right temperature, to wrap it in cloth and coax tiny mouths to suckle. Learned that the boy ate fierce and fast while his sister took her time, methodical and thorough. Learned their different cries, hunger, discomfort, loneliness, pain. The man, who still hadn't offered his name and she hadn't asked, showed her how to change soiled cloths and where he kept the clean ones, how to hold them so their heads stayed supported, how to walk the floor at 2 in the morning when sleep seemed like something from another lifetime. He didn't talk much, would disappear into the storm twice daily to tend the barn, coming back crusted with ice and smelling of hay and horse. Would eat whatever simple meal she managed between feeding salt pork, beans, bread she baked in the Dutch oven. Would check the babies with those careful hands before settling into the chair nearest the stove while she took the bed. On the third night, when the wind finally died and left behind a silence so complete it rang in her ears, she woke to find him standing at the window. The boy was asleep against his shoulder, tiny head nestled into his neck. Moonlight turned everything silver. "Can't get her to settle," he said quietly, though she hadn't spoken. "Boy's fine, but she just keeps fussing." She rose, still in her day dress since she had nothing else, and went to the second cradle. The girl's face was scrunched, not quite crying but working up to it. She picked her up and felt the baby's forehead. Warm. Maybe too warm. "She's fevered." He turned fast, crossing to her in 2 strides. Put his own hand to his daughter's head, and she watched his jaw tighten. "How bad?" "I don't know." Fear crept into her voice. "I don't know what's normal." I don't know. Snow. He cut her off, already moving. We can bring the fever down with snow. He handed her the boy and went to the door, returning moments later with a pan full of clean white powder. Hold her. She watched him work with the same focused intensity he brought to everything, dampening a cloth, wrapping it around the baby's small body, murmuring words too low to catch. The girl whimpered but didn't cry. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, her skin began to cool. There, he breathed. There. He looked up, and their eyes met over his daughter's head. Something passed between them, wordless and raw. Not romance or attraction, but recognition. Two people thrown together by circumstance, trying desperately not to fail the helpless creatures in their care. My name's Anna, she said. Didn't know why she chose that moment to offer it, but it felt important somehow. He nodded. Samuel, a pause. They're called Sarah and Daniel. The names made them real in a way they hadn't been before. Not just the boy and the girl, but Sarah and Daniel, children who'd lost their mother and desperately needed someone to keep them alive. She looked down at Daniel sleeping against her chest, then at Sarah cooling in her father's arms, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the first crack in the wall she'd built around herself when her sister's husband made it clear she was a burden to be disposed of. When spring came and the advertisement's promised wages were discussed, she'd have choices to make. But tonight, with fever broken and babies breathing steady, all she felt was grateful to be here, to be needed, to matter. The snow melted slowly, revealing a landscape both harsher and more beautiful than she'd imagined. The station sat in a valley cupped by mountains still white-capped despite the warming days. Cattle, shaggy and wild-eyed, emerged from wherever they'd sheltered during the worst of winter. Samuel rode out at dawn and returned at dusk, checking fence lines and counting calves, making sure the herd survived. She settled into routines that felt older than civilization. Wake when Sarah fussed. Always Sarah first, her brother still dead asleep. Heat milk while the girl squirmed and complained. Feed them both, burp them, change them, settle them for another few hours. Sweep floors, bake bread. Mend tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small. Do it all again. Sometimes Samuel would come in for midday dinner and find her walking circles around the room, both babies crying despite her best efforts, her hair falling from its pins and her eyes red from exhaustion. He'd take one without a word, leaving her with the other, and they'd walk in opposite directions until the crying stopped. They developed an unspoken language of shared burdens and necessary silences. Other times she'd hear him in the barn late at night, the low murmur of his voice talking to the horses, and understand he needed that solitude the way she needed the moments when both babies slept and she could just stand at the window watching the world turn green. One evening in early April, he came in carrying wildflowers, set them on the table with the same awkward grace he showed the babies. Thought they might brighten things up, he said, not meeting her eyes. She stared at the purple and yellow blooms. They were crushed from being carried in his rough hands, already wilting, but something about the gesture made her throat tight. They're lovely. My wife liked flowers. The words came slow, like he was testing each one. Had a whole garden she planned to plant come spring. Drew pictures of it all winter, mapping out where everything would go. He touched one bent stem. Never got to plant a single seed. Anna didn't know what to say, didn't know how to comfort grief this fresh and terrible. So she just put the flowers in a tin cup of water and set them where the light would catch them. She would have been better at this, he continued. Better with them, better at... He gestured vaguely at the room, at everything their lives had become. You're doing fine. I'm not. He finally looked at her. I'm stumbling through every day hoping I don't break something that can't be fixed. They deserve better than barely surviving. They're not just surviving. She thought of Sarah's first real smile that morning, the way Daniel grabbed her finger during feedings now. They're growing. They're healthy. That's because of you. Because of us. He held her gaze. I couldn't do this alone. Wouldn't have made it through that first week without you. A pause. I know the advertisement promised wages. Haven't been able to spare any cash yet, spring expenses being what they are, but I don't want money. The words surprised her as much as him. She'd come here for wages, for independence, for a way to support herself that didn't involve charity or marriage. But standing in this rough cabin with wildflowers dying on the table and two babies sleeping peacefully for the first time all day, she realized money felt less important than it had 6 weeks ago. I want, she didn't know how to finish. To stay? His voice went careful. I'm not asking you to. Not asking anything except what you want. What did she want? The question felt too big, too complicated. She wanted to matter, wanted to be needed without being trapped, wanted to watch Sarah and Daniel grow up strong and healthy, wanted mornings where Samuel came in from the barn and caught her eye across the room and smiled like she'd done something right. I'll stay through summer, she said. We can talk about it again, come fall. He nodded, some tension releasing from his shoulders. Fair enough? But they both knew something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed between employer and employee, between strangers and whatever they were becoming. Summer brought heat that made the cabin feel small. She'd carry the babies outside in the evening, letting them kick on a blanket in the grass while she shelled peas or mended shirts. Samuel would join them after supper, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, talking about the herd or the weather or nothing at all. Daniel started teething, miserable and feverish. Sarah learned to roll over, then immediately tried to roll right off every surface. They stopped sleeping through the night again. Anna walked the floor until her feet ached, singing songs her mother taught her, making up new ones when the old ones ran out. Samuel would spell her at midnight, taking whichever baby was fussiest, and she'd collapse into bed still hearing phantom crying in her dreams. One night she woke to find him sitting with both babies, one in each arm, humming something wordless and low. The lamp turned his profile to bronze. She watched him from the bed, this hard man rendered soft by fatherhood, and felt her heart do something dangerous. She'd sworn off men after watching her sister's dreams shrink to fit her husband's expectations. Sworn she'd rather die alone than lose herself in someone else's needs. But Samuel didn't ask her to be smaller, didn't expect her to know things she'd never learned or pretend competence she didn't have. He just worked beside her, day after exhausting day, trying as hard as she was to keep two tiny humans alive and happy. When he looked up and caught her watching, she didn't look away. They're beautiful, she whispered. They look like her, their mother. He said it without pain, just statement of fact. She was beautiful too, inside and out. Tell me about her. So he did. Told her about a woman who could ride as well as any man, who laughed too loud and sang off key, who chose him despite having better offers, because she liked how he didn't try to tame her. Told her about the pregnancy that seemed easy until it wasn't, about 3 days of labor that left him helpless and terrified, about holding his wife's hand while she bled out faster than the doctor could stop it. She made me promise, he said, made me swear I'd raise them right, that I wouldn't let grief turn me bitter, that I'd… He stopped, jaw working. What? That I'd let myself be happy again someday. He looked at her with eyes so vulnerable it hurt. Didn't think I would. Didn't think I deserved to. But then you came stumbling through that storm looking half frozen and completely terrified, and you stayed. You could have left a dozen times, but you stayed. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. Where would I go? Anywhere. Back to your sister. To some town. To any life that didn't involve someone else's children and a man who's terrible at expressing gratitude. He shifted both babies to one arm and reached toward her with his free hand. But you stayed anyway. She took his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. I stayed because they need me. Is that the only reason? She could lie, could keep that wall up and protect herself from the risk of wanting something she might lose. But Sarah sighed in her sleep, and Daniel made his small, contented sounds, and Samuel's thumb traced circles on her wrist like he was memorizing the shape of her pulse. No, she admitted, it's not. He stood carefully, settling both babies in their cradles before returning to where she sat on the edge of the bed, knelt in front of her so they were eye level. I'm not asking for promises, he said, not asking you to be their mother or my wife or anything except honest. But if there's a chance, even a small one, that you might want this life, might want us, I need to know. She thought about the advertisement that brought her here, about stumbling through snow convinced she'd made a terrible mistake, about learning to love two babies who weren't hers by blood but felt like hers anyway, about falling asleep to the sound of Samuel's breathing and waking to find him watching the sunrise with his children in his arms. I want this, she said. Want them. Want. She touched his face, rough with stubble, familiar as her own reflection now. Want you. He kissed her then, gentle and questioning. She kissed back, answering with everything she'd been too scared to say. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. The words tumbled out, rushed and graceless. I know it's fast, know you probably think I'm out of my mind, but marry me anyway. Let me give you a real home, a real family. Let me spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice. Yes. She didn't hesitate. Didn't need to. Yes. They were married 3 weeks later by a circuit preacher passing through. Sarah fussed through the whole ceremony, and Daniel spit up on the preacher's Bible, and Anna couldn't stop laughing. Samuel kissed her in front of God and witnesses with his daughter squirming between them, and it felt perfect and chaotic and exactly right. That night, after the babies finally settled, they stood on the porch watching stars spill across the sky. His arm was around her waist, her head rested on his shoulder. Thank you, he said quietly, for not getting back on that stagecoach, for giving us a chance. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, bitter and frightened and convinced she'd never matter to anyone. Thought about the baby sleeping inside who taught her that love didn't require blood. Thought about the man beside her who'd seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. Thank you for pulling me out of that snow, she said, for bringing me home. And it was home now, this rough cabin in the middle of nowhere. Home in a way her sister's house never was, in a way no place had been since her mother died. Home because of the family they'd built from grief and desperation and stubborn hope. Sarah cried from inside. Daniel joined her seconds later, a perfect chorus of infant outrage. Samuel sighed. Anna laughed. They went inside together to face another long night, but together now, and that made all the difference. Years later, when Sarah and Daniel asked about how their parents met, Anna would tell them about a blizzard and a desperate cowboy and 2 babies who needed saving. Would tell them that sometimes the worst circumstances lead to the best outcomes. That family isn't always blood, and home isn't always the place you started. But that night, standing in a cabin that still smelled of milk and wood smoke, holding a man who'd whispered, "My twins need you," and given her purpose, she didn't think about the future at all. Just listened to the babies crying, felt Samuel's hand find hers in the darkness, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. Inside, they worked together to soothe their children, moving in the synchronized dance of parents who'd learned each other's rhythms. And when the babies finally slept and they collapsed into bed exhausted, Anna's last thought before sleep took her was simple and true. Okay. She'd been thrown into a blizzard and found everything she never knew she needed.